it seemed that certain guests came, built them, and probably those heads do represent their original builders.
For centuries, one mystery has stood alone in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, a small, windswept island, thousands of kilometers from any shore. An island so remote that sailors once called it the end of the world. Its name is Easter Island.
Who are these people?
One possible explanation for why these heads of the Easter Island stone figures face the heavens is as if they were pointing a finger to their place of origin, but not because they forgot where they came from, but so the humans could remember.
And across its lonely hills stand nearly 1,000 enormous stone figures' faces carved from volcanic rock, gazing silently toward the horizon. They're called the Moai. Who built them? Why were they made? And how could ancient people, living on one of the most isolated islands on Earth, have created such impossible giants, some weighing over 80 tons?
But no one can hope to answer the central riddle of this mysterious island. No written history from the age of giants has ever been found, so we'll never know the purpose of these extraordinary sculptures.
But new evidence is now revealing something extraordinary, a discovery that could rewrite everything we thought we knew about the island and the people who once lived here. This is the story of Rapa Nui, the island beyond the horizon, and the secret its silent watchers may still be guarding. But to uncover that secret, we have to start where the mystery first takes shape. You might ask, why mention this particular mountain? Why here? Because if we want to understand how these giants were made, we must go back to the place of their birth, the quarry where they first opened their eyes to the sun. That place is called Rano Raraku, known to the islanders as the Quarry of Gods. From a distance, it looks like a scar of pale rock rising above the grass. Up close, it feels like time itself stopped in the middle of a breath. All around, half-born faces lean out of the earth jaws still fused to the bedrock, torsos buried to the shoulders, profiles emerging from stone as if waking from a dream. Some are only outlines, others are nearly complete, save for a final polish that never came. More than 400 of these unfinished figures lie here, frozen in every stage of creation. The island's most revealing puzzle laid out in plain sight. This is not a field of statues hauled in from somewhere else. It is a factory floor carved straight from the volcano's flank. And here, the method becomes visible. The carvers didn't hack out blocks and then sculpt. They drew the Moai downward from the cliff itself, tracing the head, the high bridge of the nose, the long ear, the heavy chin freeing each form along its back until the figure lay like a ship on a cradle, tethered to the mountain by a thin keel of stone. Only at the end would they sever that last connection, levering the body onto a ramp, beginning the impossible journey from quarry to altar. One colossus still lies there, 21 meters long, an unfinished giant pinned to the slope, weighing an estimated 300 tons. It's proof in rock of an ambition larger than the island that held it. And yet, the tools were humble. No metal, no bronze chisels or iron saws, only the island's own stones, harder basalt hammerstones to bite at the softer volcanic tuff. To carve a face out of volcanic rock with another rock is like sculpting marble with chalk. Every plane of a cheek, every crease at the lips, every hollow of an eye demanded thousands upon thousands of blows rhythm, patience, generations. Microscopic studies show that carving spanned centuries, between the 7th and 17th centuries CE, but the timeline doesn't explain the will behind it, because knowing how they carved the Moai doesn't answer why. Look closely, and you can still see their pauses carved into the hillside starts and abandonments, like a song interrupted. Was it famine war? A decree from the priest kings? Or did the island itself finally forget what the statues were for? We can trace the techniques, the cuts, the ramps, the sequence of blows. We can even imagine the soundstone striking stone, a hollow heartbeat echoing through the crater. But comprehension ends at the threshold of belief. If carving the statues was an act of devotion, then where they were placed must have carried meaning. The people of Rapa Nui believed that each Moai was more than a monument, it was a guardian, a bridge between the living and the land itself. On Rapa Nui, the islanders have a saying: "The statues are our ancestors, they watch over the harvest." For years. That phrase was taken as mere metaphor, a poetic relic from a culture that had long lost its written language, but in the last few decades. Science has begun to uncover something unexpected, a possibility that their legend was not symbolic, but literal. When archaeologists began to excavate around several Moai, they found something that made no sense at first. The soil, soft, dark, fertile, stood in sharp contrast to the rest of the island, where volcanic ash and rock form a dry, nutrient-poor crust. Chemical tests confirmed that the ground near the statues contained unusually high levels of phosphorus, potassium, and nitrogen, the essential nutrients for growth. Wherever the statues stood, the soil was somehow richer, more alive. Then came an even stranger discovery, using ground-penetrating radar. Researchers mapped what lay beneath the platforms on which the Moai rested. The data revealed something like veins, narrow channels of moisture winding beneath the rock, forming an underground network of springs. In every case, the statues had been placed directly above these hidden flows of water. It wasn't a coincidence. The Moai had been aligned with precision, not according to stars or seasons, but according to the unseen paths of the island's groundwater. To modern scientists, that knowledge borders on the impossible. How could a people without metal, maps, or written measurements have known where water moved beneath solid stone? Perhaps what we call myth was once their form of science. The statues, then, might not have been idols of worship, but instruments of memory, markers of survival. They could have served as reminders of where to plant, where to dig, where life still pulsed beneath the ground when the island's surface went dry. Standing before them today, you can almost feel it, a quiet vibration in the air, a pulse rising from the earth itself. It's as if the island breathes through these giants, and they, in turn, remember it. Maybe the Moai weren't built to be worshipped, but to remember where life flows. If the island's ancestors watched over the living, then perhaps it was only a matter of time before someone from the outside world looked back and saw them. It was April 5th, 1722, Easter Sunday. Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen sighted land after months adrift in the Pacific. His mission was to find the mythical southern continent. But what he found instead would ignite one of archaeology's strangest legends. As his ships neared the island, Roggeveen saw them rows of colossal stone figures, their backs turned to the sea, their faces gazing inland. He described them as a wall of giants guarding nothing, for men half mad from hunger and salt air. It was a vision both wondrous and unsettling. When they came ashore, the crew met the island's inhabitants, the Rapa Nui, cautious but welcoming, and among them, Roggeveen claimed to have seen something extraordinary. The island of Easter, inhabited by the long-eared giants. That single line, written in his logbook, became the first recorded account of the so-called giants of Easter Island. No sketches, no corroboration, just one entry that would outlive its author. Historians later noted that no other crew member confirmed the sighting. The original journal itself disappeared for nearly a century, surviving only in fragments and translation. Yet the record had already done its work. It gave written form to a legend that, until then, had lived only in oral memory. For generations, the Rapa Nui had spoken of the Hanau Ipe, the long-ears atoll. Light-skinned people said to have built the Moai before being overthrown by the short-ears in a violent revolt. Roggeveen's note, whether mistaken or true, became the bridge between myth and history, the document that transformed a local story into a global mystery. Archaeologists today find no physical proof of a separate giant race, no oversized skeletons, no alien DNA, only the enduring myth that refuses to fade. And so, from a single line in a sailor's journal, the story of Easter Island's giants began. Long before European ships ever crossed its horizon, Rapa Nui was said to have been divided not by sea, but by blood. Two peoples, two destinies, the Hanau Ipe, the long ears, and the Hanau Momoko, the short ears. One ruled, the other served. The long ears were said to be nobles, priests, the keepers of sacred knowledge, the short ears, workers and farmers, the ones who carved and hauled the stone. Even the statues seemed to echo this hierarchy. Look closely at the Moai, the narrow foreheads, the elongated earlobes, the proud, squared jaws. Each one bears the features of the long ears themselves. Could these giants of stone have been portraits, self-portraits of a ruling class that wanted their likenesses to endure beyond flesh and time? Modern anthropology paints a simpler picture. DNA evidence links the Rapa Nui to Polynesian seafarers who settled here around the 4th century CE. Their tools were primitive, their population small, perhaps no more than a few thousand at the island's height. And yet, they raised nearly 1,000 statues, some weighing over 80 tons. The question lingers, how could a society so small, so isolated, have achieved feats of engineering that rival civilizations with vast labor forces and advanced metallurgy? Was it sheer ingenuity, or did they inherit a knowledge older than themselves? Fragments of a science passed down through ritual and myth. According to Rapa Nui oral tradition, the Long-Ears were not only rulers, but builders. They possessed a sacred energy called mana, a force that allowed them to move the Moai with song and will alone. The Short Ears, resentful and afraid, eventually rebelled. The legends say the Long-Ears dug a great trench, filled it with fire, but were overcome in their sleep. Only one survived. Archaeologists find traces of this story, a deep earthen ditch known as Poik Ditch, ash layers suggesting ancient burning, whether literal or symbolic. Every culture invents giants to explain what ordinary hands could never do. Maybe the Long-Ears were no different architects of both stone and story, whose legacy became indistinguishable from the monuments they left behind. If the Long-Ears truly built the statues, one question remains: how did they move them? It's one thing to carve a giant from stone. It's another to make it walk. Archaeologists have spent decades trying to solve that riddle, and though science has proposed many answers, none seem to match the quiet certainty in the islanders' own stories that the Moai once walked to their altars on their own. The most traditional theory was born not from legend, but from physics. In 1999, American archaeologist Joanne van Tilburg attempted to recreate the feat. Her team built a full-scale replica of a Moai 9 tons of carved stone and placed it on a wooden sled mounted over rolling logs. 60 volunteers strained against ropes, inching the statue forward. It worked for a moment. Then, the logs sank into the soil under the crushing weight. The statue lurched and stalled. The test proved movement was possible, but only on flat, ideal terrain. Easter Island, in contrast, is anything but. Its volcanic slopes are jagged, uneven, slick with clay after rain. Some of the Moai weigh 10 times more than the replica. Even with hundreds of hands in perfect coordination, a single slip could shatter a monument that took years to carve. Van Tilburg's sled method demonstrated effort, not elegance. So researchers turned back to the stories to the strange, poetic memory that said the statues walked. In 2012, another team decided to take that idea literally. National Geographic documented the experiment archaeologist Charles Love and his crew used only ropes and balance, mimicking the walking described in Rapa Nui legend. They tied cables to a replica Moai about 3 meters tall, and 18 people pulled from alternating sides, rocking it left, then right, inch by inch. The result stunned even the skeptics. The statue began to move, not dragged, not rolled, but stepping, swaying forward, as if dancing to some ancient rhythm. It was clumsy, but real. For a moment, myth and science met halfway, yet the success was short-lived. The distance covered was only a few meters, and the terrain controlled. Scaling that up to a 100-ton Moai, over kilometers of uneven ground, remains beyond reach. The motion, though possible, would have fractured the base of larger statues. It's a method that explains some, but not all. The deeper mystery lingers. How could a culture without wheels, metal, or beasts of burden achieve such precision again and again, nearly 1,000 times? Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower, built in 1905, followed the same principles: standing wave resonance between ground and ionosphere, transmission without wires, power carried not through copper, but through the air itself. The golden capstone of Giza and Tesla. When the Italian team placed the two designs side by side, the pyramid and the tower, the symmetry was undeniable. Both systems drew energy from the planet itself. Both pulsed upward toward the sky. Both depended on a geometry, and then came the silence. A song interrupted. Was it famine war? A decree from the priest-kings? Or did the island itself finally forget what the statues were for? We can trace the techniques, the cuts, the ramps, the sequence of blows. We can even imagine the soundstone, because what could have been the greatest excavation of the century never happened. Every formal request to drill or excavate beneath the Khafre pyramid was denied. Official statements spoke of heritage protection, but behind the language, an older pattern surfaced, a history of discoveries buried not by sand, but by authority. It had happened before. In 1993, Rudolf Gantenbrink's small robot reached a sealed stone door deep inside Khufu's pyramid, only for the project to be abruptly shut down. In 1991, after the conference, the research team's website came under coordinated cyber attacks. Files vanished. Anonymous warnings arrived. No one claimed responsibility. No one needed to. But literal. When archaeologists began to excavate around several Moai, they found something that made no sense at first. The questions hanging in the air were far heavier than any stone block at Giza, the rest of the island, where volcanic ash and rock form a dry, nutrient-poor crust. Chemical tests confirmed that what happens if the pyramids were not memorials to the dead, but monuments to energy? What happens if an ancient civilization had once learned to harness the pulse of the earth and someone? Somewhere, the hall grew quiet again, the kind of quiet that comes not from certainty, but from realization. The sand of Giza has buried countless secrets, but sand shifts, and secrets do not sleep forever. Springs. In every case, the statues had been placed directly above. The hall grew still, as if the air itself had paused to listen. Beyond the walls of the conference center, the sands of Giza lay unchanged, yet something imperceptible had shifted. Not in the desert, but in the space between what humanity knows and what it has forgotten. Or written measurements have known where water moved beneath solid stone. Perhaps what we call myth was once their form of science, the statue beneath layers of stone and silence. The structure revealed for centuries, people have looked outward, imagining the beginning written in the stars. Yet the story may be written elsewhere in the slow memory of stone, in the quiet movements beneath the surface, in something that endures long after names and empires fade. As the last data faded from the screens, what remained was not an answer, but a widening silence. A silence vast enough to hold questions that do not. Where does the boundary lie between what is buried and what is remembered? Between what we discover and what, perhaps, has been waiting for us all along? Saw them. It was April 5th, 1722, Easter Sunday. Most archaeologists dismissed the old tales of giants entirely. Instead, they offered a familiar narrative, one that sounded almost cinematic in its tragedy, according to the war and ecological collapse theory. The island's downfall was a story of human greed and environmental ruin. As the population grew, rival clans began fighting over timber, food, and land. The forests were stripped bare, the soil eroded, the crops failed. Hunger turned to violence. Some even claimed that, by the mid-18th century, famine had driven the survivors to cannibalism. In this version, the Moai, once symbols of divine protection, became targets of rage. People who felt abandoned by their gods toppled the statues in defiance, breaking them as if to punish the heavens themselves. But not everyone agreed. Another group of scholars looked at the same evidence and shook their heads. They found no signs of war, no mass graves, no shattered skulls or weapon fragments. The only tools unearthed were for farming and bird hunting, not battle. The bones of the dead bore no wounds, no burns, no signs of slaughter. If the island had torn itself apart, where was the proof? When science reaches its limit, myth tends to slip back in. That's when the most controversial theory surfaced, the idea of extraterrestrial intervention. It sounded absurd, yet disturbingly tidy, if no human explanation fit. Perhaps it wasn't humans at all. According to this theory, the so-called giants were not mythical ancestors, but visitors. When their mission ended, or when disaster struck, they were taken away by their creators. Some versions claimed the gods returned, gathered the last of the giant builders, and erased all traces of them in a single night. That's why, believers say, not a single skeleton remains. It's an idea that seems laughable until you see what they point to as evidence. On the island stands a statue, unlike the others, Tiki, the guardian deity of the Rapa Nui. Its smooth oval head, elongated skull, and enormous eyes resemble not a man, but something eerily close to the gray alien archetype. To this day, no definitive answer has emerged. Did the Rapa Nui leave behind any form of writing? The answer is yes, but the tragedy is, no one alive today can understand it anymore. After Europeans arrived on Easter Island, the fate of its people took a dark turn within decades. Slave traders from Peru descended upon the island, capturing hundreds of Rapa Nui, including priests and scholars, the last keepers of their ancestral knowledge. By the late 19th century, under international pressure, the Peruvian government ordered the release of the captives, but only 15 survivors made it home carrying with them something far deadlier than chained smallpox. The disease swept across the island like fire, wiping out nearly the entire population. From thousands, only a few hundred remained. Perhaps the intervention of aliens will forever be unproven, but the intervention of Europeans is an undeniable fact. And it didn't just destroy lives, it severed memory. With the elders gone, oral history shattered. Legends once told around fires became fragments incomplete, fading echoes of what once was. What little survived tells of two ancient groups, the long-ears and the short-ears nobles and priests, and the common people. The Moai, with their elongated ears and solemn faces, may have been sculpted in the image of those long-lost ancestors, and amid the ashes of that culture. The Rapa Nui left one extraordinary gift to history, the only known writing system in all of Polynesia Rongorongo. It was carved onto wooden tablets. The islanders called them the talking woods. No one knows what they say. Were they prayers, records, or messages left by the last of the long-ears? When Christian missionaries arrived, they saw the tablets as works of the devil and burned almost all of them. Only a few survived, scattered in museums across the world, silent as the stone faces that still watch over the island. From then on, the story of the giants changed from memory to legend, from legend to myth. And now, perhaps only you, the listener, can decide what to believe. Were the statues truly moved by a god's invisible force, or were they raised by human hands, guided by a faith powerful enough to make stone walk? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the forgotten memory of Rapa Nui, the island where even the stones keep secrets.